In this review series, we will be dissecting the gameplay, story, and aesthetics of each Final Fantasy game and giving them a score out of 10 so we can finally ask the question, just how good is Final Fantasy XII, the Zodiac Age? I personally love the battle system of Final Fantasy XII, but it does have its problems and I can see why some people have an issue with it. Every action in this game can be performed automatically using the gambit system, which can be super satisfying once you get a set of gambits that just works and you don't have to do anything. But that lies the issue with this system as well. A lot of the strategy in this game happens before the fights even begin, as you do a lot of setup to ensure that each fight becomes successful. Another critique of the gambit system is that you have to buy all of the gambits from a shop in order to use them, and I don't really understand why they implemented that. I think all of the gambit conditions should have just been given to you from the beginning of the game, because there are a lot of gambits and a lot of them do the same things or have very minor differences, and it just makes it kind of silly and feels like a waste of gil because a lot of these gambits you won't be using throughout the game. Moving on to the battles themselves, I think this is one of the more successful parts of the gameplay in this game. Enemies interact with you in real time, so there's no need to cut to a battle screen like in other Final Fantasy games. It makes the world feel more alive and feels a lot more similar to an MMO like Final Fantasy XI or XIV. You can still pause the action at any moment and bring up the battle screen menu where you can select attacks and spells if you are not automatically casting them with your gambits. Your magic spells and attacks and items all take time to charge using the ATB gauge at the bottom right corner of the screen. So it feels like a hybrid of all of the Final Fantasy elements of other games combined into one, and I think it's very unique and really interesting. There are people who prefer the old school ATB system of other Final Fantasy games and those who prefer the more action-based gameplay of the newer Final Fantasy games, and this feels like a bridge between those. And you could say jack of all trades, master of none, but I think they hit a really good sweet spot of the two styles. I also have to commend this game on the use of magic. Spells in this game are incredibly powerful. They are some of the only attacks that can deal area of effect damage to multiple enemies, but of course they do take up a lot of MP. To compensate for this, there are special techniques you can learn on the license board which allow you to recover MP when you kill enemies, when you take damage, and you also recover MP as you walk around the world itself. This means that you don't have to waste loads of items like ethers and elixirs to recover your MP. You can naturally gain MP back just by playing the game and getting stronger. Spells remain the most powerful way to play this game in my opinion, even towards the end of the game. And that's good because I feel like a lot of other Final Fantasy games, magic is super powerful at the beginning, then as soon as you get super powerful weapons and you realize how expensive some of the magic abilities are, you end up not really using many magic skills towards the end at all, apart from a few buffs and heals from here to there. Another successful element to the battle system is the class system that is present in this game. It is vast and unique and expansive. There are 12 jobs to choose from, each with their own special techniques, special weapons, and armor that is unique to each class. There is some crossover between the armor pieces and skill sets, but for the most part, the jobs all feel very unique and different from one another. You can also select 2 classes per character, so you can come up with all kinds of crazy combinations, like the Black Mage Monk, where you are dealing really strong physical damage and really strong magical damage. This type of customizability makes this game super replayable because you can come up with all kinds of crazy combinations that make you want to play the game over and over again, and even challenge yourself to use some of the weaker classes of the game. I recently played this game on my channel using 1 job per character, and I believe this is a much more fun way to play the game. Because these classes are very powerful, having 2 of them at your disposal does kind of dampen the difficulty level of the game, and using just 1 class really limits what you can do and makes the game a lot more enjoyable and fun to play in my opinion. So if you want to check out that video, there will be a link on screen or in the description to check that out. Another shortcoming of the battle system is the quickenings, and they do look very cool and flashy. They're basically like your limit breaks, but they can be accessed whenever you want. You know, you have a bar that fills up, but you can just save it for every single boss battle. Every time you reach a save point, it replenishes, so whenever there is a major fight coming up, you can just use your quickenings and it almost acts as just a kill button for every single boss in the game. And I think that's very unfortunate. I wish it was harder to use these quickenings, I wish they took longer to charge, and I wish they weren't replenished when you went to save points, because it kind of makes every boss battle in this game a bit of a joke, and I don't think they balanced it correctly. I'm going to give the battle system an overall score of 7 out of 10. Moving on to the boss battles in this game, in the main story at least, the boss battles are not particularly interesting. Like I said previously, you can just use your quickenings to destroy any boss battle in this game in the main story without any consequence. So if you are playing the game like that, you probably won't even get to see many of these fights. But even if you don't use the quickenings, the boss battles don't present much of a challenge in this game, to be honest. Especially if you are doing a lot of these side quests and hunts, which I do recommend because it is some of the more enjoyable parts of this game. It does mean that you'll probably be way too over leveled for these boss battles though, and you will just see them go by very quickly. Some notable mentions though are bosses like the Demon Wall that have a unique gimmick such as a time limit, but even ones like that are quite difficult you can skip altogether. So there isn't much of a challenge with the boss battles. There aren't any that are particularly very memorable in my opinion either, but they're not terrible. They do have some very cool designs, and each boss has its own sort of special attack that it can do, and it kind of cuts away from the action to perform these magical super duper awesome moves, and that's very cool. I appreciate the attention to detail there. It's just a shame that they don't really do too much to the party when they happen. They're kind of cool to look at, but there's no real threat of danger, so the boss battles just feel like a mundane obstacle that you have to go through to get to the end of the game, rather than a pivotal moment in the story that you have to overcome. So for that reason, I'm going to give the boss battles a 4 out of 10. Moving on to the side content now, and this is some of the best side content across all of the Final Fantasy games in my opinion, and that is mostly due to the hunts. You see a bulletin posted about a monster that needs to be killed, you go and find the contractor, and then you go and find the monster, kill it, go back to the contractor and get a reward. This could become very repetitive and tiresome, but they managed to make the way in which you find these monsters super interesting and unique, and more difficult as time goes on. For example, one enemy may only appear when it is snowing, one may only appear if you kill every other enemy in the area, so on and so forth. So it makes it feel dynamic, it makes it feel like a challenge. It's not just as simple as find the person, find the monster, rinse repeat. They add little bits here and there to mix it up a bit and make it more challenging. And this is where most of the fun in this game lies. Some hunts can be offered to you very early on in the game, which are way out of your level league, but you can go and fight them anyway if you want a challenge, and that's very cool. It just means that you can grind if you want to, or you can wait till later in the game to defeat them. It really doesn't matter what order you do it in, as long as you get them all done. And if there is one that you don't really like or you can't defeat, you move on, you go on to the next one. The rewards are also super great. They can just provide you with weapons and armor that are far better than anything you can obtain at the moment, so it feels rewarding enough to do all of these hunts. And they're also very fun, much better than the boss battles. They are basically their own set of boss battles, but they're much more unique and present much more of a challenge than the main story quests. Some other side content are all of the hidden espers. Throughout the game you collect summons as you go along the journey, but there are lots of hidden ones that are not readily available to you that you have to do a bit more of a deep dive in order to find. All of these hidden esper battles are super interesting. They have their own unique gimmicks, such as not being able to use magic, not being able to use physical attacks, as well as being on a time limit. They challenge the way you look at the game and force you to readjust the way you play in order to defeat them and be successful. And that is incredible. I wish some of the main story bosses did that to make it feel more challenging and unique, but it's good that we still got that. And it forces the player to interact with the Gambit system in a way that you wouldn't usually, and fully explore everything that the game has to offer. So definitely, if you are considering playing this game, go for all of the side content. Go and find the hidden espers, go and do all of the hunts. I promise you it is the most fun way to play the game. There's also a lot of hidden areas to explore. You can just go linearly from one area to the next, but the world is so large large and vast that if you take the time to look around, you will find more treasure and unlock more weapons and armor that most players who just walk from A to B will not discover. One negative I could say about the side content is that a lot of the treasure is kind of convoluted and requires RNG to require some of the special weapons. Basically, treasure chests will replenish every time you leave an area and come back, and there's a certain percentage chance that a treasure chest could contain a potion or some gil or a really important weapon that you really want, and there's no real way to know what is in each treasure chest, and it is just very luck based. So I would say that is the only negative, but it's a very small negative on the side content. It is some of the best in the series in my opinion, and for that reason I'm going to give it a 9 out of 10. Unfortunately, the mini-games in this game kind of suck, and they're some of the worst in the entire series, to be honest. They really break up the pacing and the action of the game, and they're just not very satisfying or fun to play. Most mini-games in this game consist of running around an area and talking to people, and it's very unexciting, it's very unappealing. The Arcades Chops mini-game is probably the pinnacle of it. After doing a mini-game where you run around the slums looking for clues, you then have to run around the big city and match up two people's stories together in order to gain chops, and it's just very unfun. It's taken you so long to get to this point in the game. It's been hyped up for a long time, and you finally get there and you're expected to just run around the city and talk to people, and it's just not very fun. I guess if there are any positives, the Captain Bosch von Ronsenberg minigame spawned a very funny meme which is quite memorable and humorous, although it isn't very fun to play, and the puzzles in the dungeon are actually fairly interesting, at least compared to some other Final Fantasy games. They're unique enough and they force you to think about the game in a different way to get through each of the dungeons. So dungeon minigames get a pass, but all of the other story minigames are terrible. They really are bad, and you can't replay any of them either. Most Final Fantasy games have like recurring minigames that you can come back to and play again, but these are just obstacles that break up the pacing of the story and just waste a lot of valuable time that could be used on developing characters or having more interesting fun battles. So I am going to give the minigames a 3 out of 10. This brings the overall score of the gameplay at a 5.75. The plot of Final Fantasy XII is much more politics heavy than it is about the actual characters themselves. Instead, it focuses on the bigger picture of preventing war and preventing destruction and chaos from happening. Whereas most other Final Fantasy games, the world that you are in is already going into turmoil, there's already death and destruction happening, and your party is just trying to salvage whatever is left of the world. The stakes are high in this game, but you don't really feel the pressure too much because it's all done through dialogue rather than action. You kind of don't really get this huge sense of urgency, you know? There's not a giant monster destroying the planet, there is no evil witch planning to cast spells and destroy cities. Instead, it's more of a slow burn, and it makes the story feel a bit more real, but in that I think it loses some of the fantastical elements that all the other Final Fantasy games have. The pacing of this game is also a little bit funny. It's a lot of find this item, find that item. You go from a big stretch of story, followed by long travelling across the world, followed by a dungeon with a puzzle to find an item, followed by a boss battle, rinse, repeat. It's good pacing, it works, but it does become fairly repetitive as you start to already anticipate what is going to happen. You know that you're going to have to just find another item again, travel across the world, and there's nothing really that breaks up that pacing. I feel like most other Final Fantasy games always have like a spanner that gets thrown into the works. Some sort of plot device that will happen that will throw the pacing off, force your party to change or the world itself to change, and that never really happens in Final Fantasy XII. It is a lot of go from A to B to C. There is one twist towards the beginning of the game that Bosch is actually a good guy and is being framed by his evil twin brother, but again, this happens very early on in the game. We don't really get a huge dramatic scene where we find this out, it's just sort of told to us and then kind of left aside. It lacks any drama that we expect from this series. Even moments that could have been dramatic, such as the death of the King of Arcades, are left kind of lackluster. They lack a lot of drama or consequences, you kind of see it happen, you know that Vayne is now taking over, but the moments never really feel epic or larger than life. For that reason, I am going to give the plot and pacing a 3 out of 10.
And I want only to be free.
The main theme of Final Fantasy XII is about freedom, and this is best explored through the character Ashe, as she wants freedom for her country from the Empire. But this theme does also translate into other characters such as Vaan, who wants to be free from the life that he has and become a sky pirate, free to roam wherever he chooses.
I'll be a sky pirate, free to go where I will.
This desire for freedom is what drives the characters and is their main purpose for going on the quest that they are on. But there are other themes of power and revenge that come into play. What is the price of freedom if it means taking revenge on the Empire? These are all things that our characters have to come to terms with and manage. How far do they take their revenge? How will they use the power that they are given? And will they use this power to destroy the Empire or relinquish that power for the sake of peace? The themes of this game, they're not too groundbreaking or unique or interesting, but they are explored enough throughout the game, mostly through the character Ashe.
You would have me destroy the Empire? Is this my duty? Is this what you want?
Ashe and Vaan have both lost loved ones to the Empire, so revenge is very much on their mind, but they eventually come to the conclusion that it's not worth taking revenge. It will not change the past. Their loved ones are gone. It has happened. Although revenge may seem satisfying, if it will compromise their freedom in the long run, they decide not to take it. So the themes are fairly simple, but they're explored enough and interesting enough that I'm going to give it a 6 out of 10. The characters in this game are a very mixed bag. Half the cast is very well developed and the other half is very lackluster. I've already mentioned Ashe. She is by far the most developed character in this game. She battles with all of the themes present and is the driving force that keeps the party together. She's strong, passionate and dedicated and makes a great female protagonist and role model. Balthier is also very well developed. He's mysterious, charming and interesting, and we uncover more about him as the game progresses, making us feel more connected and interested in him. He's also very hot, which helps. Vaan I actually think is a very well developed character. I know it's quite an unpopular opinion, but the protagonist doesn't always have to be the most important character. It's more so just somebody to relate to, and I do think he is relatable. He's just a kid caught up in something that is bigger than anything he has ever been a part of. He represents the common man who struggles to live day to day under the Empire. He's ambitious and wants more from life, so he joins the party to make something out of his uneventful life. It's admirable, it's relatable, and I just like him, okay? His big story moment is attempting to avenge his late brother Rex, who was murdered by Gabranth and thus the Empire itself, but he realizes towards the end of the game that nothing he does is going to bring his brother back, and revenge will only get you so far. It's a satisfying conclusion to his story arc, but that is the only real story arc we get from him. It's the only bit of character development we get, so I do understand why people have issues with Vaan, and those issues are definitely valid. Bosch is a quiet, calm and strong knight sworn to protect Ashe, and he has an evil twin brother who he also wants to get revenge on. I don't really know. It's not really explored as much as I would like it to be, and the conclusion to his story arc is not very satisfying. The two characters don't really speak about each other too much, and we don't get an insight into how these characters fell into opposing sides of the war. There's no big emotional scene of the two of them, so I'm gonna say that Bosch's character is a little bit of a flop. Fran is also a bit of a flop. She has a cool design and she's mysterious and intimidating, but we don't get too much from her. She gets a short section of the story dedicated to her, and it's cool that we get to see how she was shunned from her village for partnering with a Hume, Balthier, but after that we don't really get a lot from her. I guess she kind of ties into the theme of power, as she feels the strength of Magistai and it causes her to go crazy sometimes. It's a good indicator of how much power these items have. I think she serves her purpose well, but I wish we got a little bit more from her. The biggest floppington flopper of all though has to be Penelo. Who is this woman? Who is she? She's on the journey because she wants to follow Vaan around and she's bored, I guess? That's literally it. We get no interesting backstory. She doesn't fit into any of the themes. She has no connection to any of the other characters. She kind of has a bit of story with Larsa, the brother of Vayne, who is the main antagonist, but honestly she's just a waste of a character slot. Easily one of the most forgettable main characters in any of the Final Fantasy games, and it's really going to bring the score down because I cannot justify giving this any higher score just due to how much of a waste Penelo's character is and how little we learn about her. Characters like Ashe, Vaan and Balthier are not enough to bring the score up, unfortunately, so I'm going to give it a 5 out of 10. three main villains of Final Fantasy XII are Vayne, Gabranth and Cid, but we don't really get to see too much from these characters. Cid is probably the coolest of the three, but he shows up right at the end of the game and his arc is over very quickly. Gabranth is also a pretty cool character, and we do get a decent amount of character development for him. When we start the game, he appears as a ruthless, heartless killer, and as it progresses, you start to see him question his own morality and questioning the empire that he serves, which eventually leads him to change his mind and help our party out towards the end of the game. I just wish we got to see more of an interaction between him and Bosch, but he is easily the most developed of the characters. Vayne is supposed to be the main antagonist of the game. He is the man in charge of the empire. He murders his own father to get that power, but because he is such a large menacing character who is very powerful, we don't really get to see him much throughout the story. He has other people like Gabranth and Cid that do the dirty work for him, so there is a big disconnect between the main antagonist and our heroes, and his personality is rather dull and we don't really learn anything about him personally. You've also got the judges, which are some of the villains, but aside from a couple of cool fights, we don't really see too much of them. Overall, the main cast of villains are a little bit weak, weaker than the main party I would say, so I'm going to give them a 4 out of 10. This makes the overall score of the story a 4.5. The character designs in this game are much more understated when compared to the other Final Fantasy games, and I do quite like that. Nobody looks insane, they all look like they are a part of the world, but are also unique and interesting enough to separate themselves as the main cast. Fran is a personal fave of mine. She just looks so cool, and she's very fun to control as your party leader. Ash also looks great. Balthier looks awesome. Vaan looks cool, I love his little crop top. It's very femme but also with a masculine twist. The enemy designs are also very cool. They're very large, they're epic, they have a good scale, they all feel quite menacing. They do reuse enemy models with different skins over the top, and it does get a little bit repetitive, but there's enough variety in there that it doesn't feel too tiresome. The only designs I'm not a huge fan of are Penelo and Bosch. Bosch's outfit is kind of ridiculous, but nothing compared to other Final Fantasy games, so I will give it a pass. And Penelo's design is just a little bit bland, and I do really dislike her hair. Like, that is just terrible. Overall though, the character designs in this game are very, very good, so I'm going to give it an 8 out of 10. The cinematics and cutscenes in this game are definitely a little bit lacking. Some of the sound effects seem to be missing from a lot of cutscenes, and a lot of the audio for the voice acting is very muffled, and it just feels quite strange. It kind of takes you out of the story as you're wondering what happened to their microphone and why they sound like that.
How old are you, Rex?
17, sir.
These sound issues just stop a lot of the cutscenes from feeling very epic, and they also don't utilize the full motion videos very well. Some of the best moments of this game are subjected to just having the in-game graphics rather than going to the cool, fun, shiny full motion video graphics. Luckily, the in-game graphics are really good, so you're not missing out on too much, but there were definitely some missed opportunities. So for all of the audio issues and lack of cinematic qualities, I'm going to give the cinematics a 3 out of 10. Now, moving on to the world of Ivalice itself, it all feels very connected, unique, and interesting. You get a world map that grows as you explore more, and it's so huge. So many secret areas and parts of the game that you can't access until later, so it forces you to go back to these places and explore more. You're also able to teleport wherever you want from a save sphere, and it makes exploring easy and accessible. You can see in real time how each area connects to another and see the transition between biomes, and it all feels very real and makes sense. Some of my favourite areas are the Fon Coast, the Steel Shrine of Miriam, the Golmore Jungle, really pretty stuff. It's fun to just stop the action and look around with the camera and see all the beautiful scenery around you. Rabanastre is another highlight for me. It's kind of like the hub world and it feels busy, it feels bustling, you get a real range of races of people that all live together in this crazy city. It's also inspired much more by Middle Eastern cultures, which is a new take for Final Fantasy that we haven't seen before, and I think the aesthetic really works. However, some of the other towns and cities are a little lackluster, such as Arcades just feeling very small in comparison. And this is supposed to be the capital city, and you see all of these tall, crazy skyscrapers, but you don't really get to explore it very much. But that is the only area of the game I'm not a huge fan of. I think the rest of it is all absolutely amazing, and some of the best in the series, so I'm going to give the world a 9 out of 10. The music in all of the Final Fantasy games are always incredible, but I'll be honest, this one is not one of my favourite soundtracks. There's no real standout track, to be honest. The music is not a focal point of the game, and that may contribute to why some of the cutscenes feel a bit lackluster. The music in this game is much more ambient rather than large and epic and expansive. But the ambient music they do have is very nice, and every area that you visit, the music always does fit the locations, which can't be said for a lot of other Final Fantasy games. I can't really think of a single track that I absolutely love, and usually there's about 3 or 4 tracks in a Final Fantasy game that really stand out that you remember and want to listen to again, but I can't even think of one for this game. It is more just in the background, there to sort of heighten the world itself, and I think it serves its purpose well for that. Not a standout feature, but it's not terrible by any means, so I'm going to give the music a 5 out of 10. This makes the overall score for the aesthetics a 6.25 out of 10. So now that we have gone through each category and given them a score, I'm going to calculate the average score of all of those overall scores, giving us a final score of 5.5 out of 10. So to answer the question, how good is Final Fantasy XII, the Zodiac Age? I would say it is averagely good. 5.5 seems correct for this game. It's definitely not one of the best Final Fantasy games, but it is easy to pick up and play and enjoy. I wouldn't recommend it if you're new to the series and are looking for the first Final Fantasy game to play, but if you're already a fan of the series and you haven't played this one yet, then I highly recommend picking it up. There's a lot of cool content, the battle system is fairly enjoyable, and there's loads of side content. Everything looks great, the world feels good to be in. There are just a few missing features that make it stand out amongst the catalogue of other incredible Final Fantasy games. Shout out to my members Hugo, Robbie Rose and Jury Lin, also my super jams Panus Pusher, Alexander Lasalle, Soul I, Jack B and N. Without your guys' support this channel would not be possible, so thank you very much for that. But that is all from me guys, my name has been JamSac, see you guys next time.